reviewed the file. The child's name was Elijah Marshall, 8 years old. His current foster parents, James and Patricia Turner, were filing to relinquish custody after just 4 months. Rebecca's fingers traced the edges of the manila folder, noting how thick it was for someone so young. The courtroom was quieter than usual this morning. Rebecca looked up from the papers, her gaze falling on the small figure seated in the front row. Elijah sat perfectly still, his shoulders hunched forward, eyes fixed on the floor. He wore a navy blue sweater that seemed a size too big, making him appear even smaller than he was. Unlike most children his age who fidgeted or looked around curiously, Elijah remained motionless, as if trying to make himself invisible. "Dear Honor," Patricia Turner's voice cut through the silence. "We've done everything we could, but Elijah is—" She paused, searching for words. "Simply too difficult to handle." Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After 15 years on the bench, she had heard every euphemism for giving up on a child. The familiar anger stirred in her stomach, but she kept her voice steady. "Please elaborate, Mrs. Turner." Patricia smoothed her designer skirt, her manicured nails catching the light. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist sparkled as she gestured. "He refuses to speak most days. He won't participate in family activities. When we try to include him, he just stares at us with those vacant eyes." James Turner nodded in agreement, his expensive suit rustling as he shifted in his chair. "We have other foster children who are thriving in our home. But Elijah," he shook his head, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "He's had several outbursts that deeply concerned us." "What kind of outbursts?" Rebecca pressed, noting how Elijah's shoulders tensed at the word. She watched as his small hands clutched something, tighter, a piece of paper or photograph, she couldn't quite tell. "He screams in his sleep," Patricia replied, her tone clinical and detached. "Last week we found him hiding in his closet at 3 in the morning, crying and clutching some old photograph. When we tried to help, he became hysterical. He kicked and screamed when James tried to pick him up." Rebecca's gaze returned to Elijah. His small hands were indeed gripping something, a worn, creased photograph that he held like a lifeline. She leaned forward slightly, softening her voice. "Elijah, would you like to tell me how you're feeling about all this?" The boy remained silent, his fingers tightening around the photo. The social worker beside him, Sarah Martinez, touched his shoulder gently. Her kind face showed the strain of too many cases and too little time. "Elijah hasn't spoken in several weeks, Your Honor. The trauma specialist believes it's a response to his experiences in previous placements." Previous placements. Rebecca flipped through the file again, her stomach churning as she counted them. 7 homes in 8 years. Each transfer noted behavioral issues or failure to attach as the reason for placement termination. No mention of his biological parents beyond a brief note. Circumstances of entry into foster care unclear, records incomplete, the morning D. Light shifted, casting Elijah's face in shadow. Rebecca found herself studying his features more intently than she normally would. Something about this case needled at her carefully maintained professional distance. Maybe it was the hollow look in his eyes, or the way the Turners discussed him as if he were a defective appliance they wanted to return. She had presided over hundreds of similar cases, yet this one felt different. Personal somehow. "Mrs. Turner," Rebecca addressed the foster mother, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. "In your petition, you mention Elijah's refusal to bond with your family. Have you considered that his withdrawal might be a cry for help rather than defiance?" Patricia's perfectly painted lips tightened. A flash of annoyance crossed her face before she schooled her features into a practiced expression of concern. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we're experienced foster parents. We know the difference between a child who needs help and one who simply won't accept it." James Turner cleared his throat, straightening his tie. "We've provided Elijah with everything: private school, therapy, his own room with all new furniture. We even hired a tutor to help him catch up in school. But he shows no appreciation, no desire to be part of our family." Rebecca suppressed a surge of anger at their materialistic approach to parenting. She was about to respond when something made her pause. Elijah had lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time. The intensity of his gaze struck her like a physical force. There was something hauntingly familiar about those eyes, something that made her heart race unexpectedly. A strange sensation washed over her, a mix of déjà vu and unease. She had seen countless children in her courtroom. Why did this boy's face seem to trigger something deep in her memory? Rebecca pushed the thought aside, reminding herself to maintain professional distance. The Turners' lawyer, William Bradford, stepped forward. His well-tailored suit and confident demeanor spoke of countless victories in family court. Your Honor, my clients have provided extensive documentation of Elijah's behavioral issues. The night terrors, the selective mutism, the emotional outbursts, all of these make him an unsuitable match for their household. Rebecca's fingers drummed lightly on her desk. Mr. Bradford, your clients agreed to provide a stable home for a child who has experienced significant trauma. The behaviors you're describing are typical responses to such experiences. Nevertheless, Bradford continued smoothly, the Turners have other foster children to consider. Elijah's presence is disrupting the harmony of their household. Surely, you can understand their position? Rebecca could feel a headache building behind her eyes. She glanced at Sarah Martinez. Ms. Martinez, what alternative placements are available for Elijah? The social worker shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Given his history, Your Honor, immediate placement might be difficult. He would likely need to return to the group home, temporarily while we search for a new foster family. Rebecca watched Elijah's hands begin to tremble at the mention of the group home. The photograph he clutched crinkled slightly, and she caught a glimpse of its edge, faded, well-worn, as if it had been handled countless times. A detail tugged at her mind, something about the quality of the paper, the particular shade of fading, but she couldn't quite grasp it. I see. Rebecca tried to focus on the legal aspects of the case, but her eyes kept returning to Elijah. There was something about his presence that tugged at her consciousness, like a word stuck on the tip of her tongue. She found herself studying his features, the curve of his cheek, the set of his jaw, with an intensity that surprised her. The morning wore on as Bradford presented additional documentation, school reports showing Elijah's declining grades, notes from the Turners' family therapist describing his resistance to attachment, a letter from their pediatrician expressing concern about his emotional state. Through it all, Elijah sat motionless, the photograph his only anchor to the world. Around him, Rebecca noticed small details others might miss. The way his shoes were slightly scuffed, suggesting the Turners' generosity had limits. The uncertain way he glanced at Sarah Martinez whenever someone raised their voice, as if checking whether he was in trouble. The barely perceptible tremor in his hands when James Turner moved suddenly. Your Honor? Bradford's voice snapped her back to the present. Given the circumstances, we request immediate approval of the placement termination. Rebecca straightened in her chair, forcing herself to focus on the legal matter at hand. Before I make any decisions, I would like to speak with Elijah privately in my chambers. Your Honor, Patricia Turner interjected. He won't speak. We've told you. Nevertheless, Rebecca cut her off firmly. I would like to try. She began, gathering her papers, preparing to call a recess. That's when it happened. Elijah stood up suddenly, his movement so unexpected that Sarah Martinez grabbed his arm reflexively. The photograph fluttered to the floor, but Elijah didn't seem to notice. He was staring directly at Rebecca, his eyes wide and filled with an emotion she couldn't quite read. When he spoke, his voice was small but clear, carrying easily in the hushed courtroom. You're my mom. The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, shocking in their clarity and conviction. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face as the courtroom erupted in murmurs. The Turners exchanged alarmed looks while Sarah Martinez tried to guide Elijah back to his seat, but Elijah stood firm, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. You're my mom, he repeated, stronger this time. I knew it when I saw you. Rebecca gripped the edge of her bench, her knuckles turning white. The room seemed to spin slightly, as long-buried memories threatened to surface. Memories of a hospital room, of devastating news, of a loss that had shaped the last 8 years of her life. The photograph lay face down on the courtroom floor, its secrets still hidden. Patricia Turner's voice cut through the chaos. "Your Honor, clearly this demonstrates his instability. He's delusional. Court is in recess," Rebecca managed to say, her voice barely steady. She rose quickly, gathering her robes around her like armor. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour." As she retreated to her chambers, Rebecca could feel Elijah's gaze, following her. His words echoed in her head, stirring up emotions she had worked so hard to bury. She closed her office door behind her and leaned against it, her professional composure finally cracking. Because the truth was, in that moment when Elijah had first looked at her, she had felt it too. A connection she couldn't explain. A pull she couldn't deny. And now, alone in her chambers, Judge Rebecca Williams faced the most challenging case of her career. One that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about her past, her present, and her future. Through the door, she could hear the commotion in the courtroom slowly settling. Sarah Martinez's gentle voice trying to calm Elijah. The Turners' sharp whispers to their lawyer. The shuffle of feet as the bailiff cleared the room. But all Rebecca could focus on was the pounding of her heart and the image of Elijah's eyes. Eyes that seemed to hold both accusation and hope, fear and recognition. She walked to her desk on unsteady legs, sinking into her chair. Her hand automatically reached for the bottom drawer, where she kept a small box of personal items. Inside was a hospital bracelet, a tiny knit cap, and a death certificate, all that remained of the son she had lost 8 years ago. The son she had never even held. The coincidence was impossible. The timing matched, but there had been a death certificate. She had grieved, had rebuilt her life around that loss. Yet Elijah's words had struck something deep within her, awakening doubts she didn't know she had. Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. In her mind, she saw again the way Elijah had looked at her, not with the desperate pleading of a child seeking any port in a storm, but with the fierce certainty of recognition. She thought of the photograph he had dropped, still lying on her courtroom floor. What secrets did it hold? What truth was hiding in the incomplete records of his early life? The clock on her wall ticked steadily, counting down the minutes until she would have to return to the courtroom, until she would have to face Elijah again, and the possibility that her carefully ordered world was about to shatter. Outside her window, the morning sun continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. But in courtroom 307, a small boy's words had just set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets, expose corruption, and potentially reunite a mother with the child she thought she had lost forever. The photograph still lay where it had fallen, waiting to tell its story. Rebecca's hands trembled as she lifted the fallen photograph from the courtroom floor. The bailiff had cleared the room, leaving her alone with the physical evidence of Elijah's claim. She turned the photo over slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The image showed a younger version of herself, seated in a hospital garden. Her hand rested protectively over her pregnant belly, her face glowing with anticipation. She remembered that day with painful clarity. It was the last photo taken before everything went wrong. "Your Honor?" Sarah Martinez's voice came from the doorway. "Are you all right?" Rebecca quickly composed herself, though her fingers still gripped the photograph. "Come in, Ms. Martinez. Where is Elijah?" "In the children's waiting room with a court assistant." Sarah closed the door behind her. "Judge Williams, I've never seen him speak like that before. In all his placements, he's never claimed to recognize anyone as family." Rebecca sank into her chair, placing the photograph on her desk. "Tell me everything you know about his background." Sarah opened her thick case file. "Elijah entered the system as an infant. The records from that time are incomplete. There's no birth certificate on file, just documentation from the foster agency that first placed him." "Which agency?" Rebecca's voice was sharp. "New Beginnings Family Services." Sarah flipped through more papers. "They closed down 5 years ago after some financial irregularities." Rebecca's mind flashed back 8 years, to the prestigious private hospital where she had given birth. The same hospital that had told her their son was stillborn, that had rushed her into signing papers while she was still groggy from medication. "Ms. Martinez, I need to tell you something." Rebecca's professional facade cracked slightly. 8 years ago, I was pregnant. It was a difficult pregnancy, and near the end there were complications. They performed an emergency C-section, and afterward, she paused, the memory still raw. They told me my son hadn't survived. I never even got to see him. Sarah's eyes widened as she made the connection. "The timing matches," she said softly. "Yes," Rebecca stood pacing behind her desk. "But there was a death certificate. I saw it, signed it. How could—" She stopped, remembering something. The nurse. There was a nurse who kept insisting I shouldn't see the body, that it would be too traumatic. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. "I need you to do something for me," she said finally. "Find out everything you can about New Beginnings Family Services, and I mean everything. Their leadership, their connections, their funding sources." "Of course." Sarah hesitated. "What about Elijah? The Turners won't take him back. And the group home?" "No." Rebecca's voice was firm. "He's not going back. To the group home. Find him an emergency placement for tonight. Tomorrow morning I'm hiring a private investigator." After Sarah left, Rebecca sank back into her chair, memories flooding back unbidden. She saw herself 8 years younger, walking into Riverside Memorial Hospital with her husband James, both of them so full of hope. James had died 2 years later in a car accident, never knowing the possibility that their son might be alive. The pregnancy had been difficult from the start. Severe morning sickness had left her hospitalized twice, but she had persevered, decorating the nursery, choosing the name Benjamin after her grandfather. Then, at 36 weeks, the complications began. Rebecca closed her eyes, remembering the rush of medical staff, the urgent voices, the sharp fear. She had woken hours later to a nurse with sympathetic eyes telling her the baby hadn't survived. Everything after that was a blur of grief and medication. The sound of her office phone ringing startled her back to the present. It was her clerk, reminding her of afternoon appointments. "Cancel everything," Rebecca ordered. "Family emergency." She spent the next hour making calls, starting with Marcus Chen, the best private investigator she knew. "I need hospital records from Riverside Memorial, 8 years ago. Focus on the maternity ward, especially cases labeled as stillbirths. And I need everything you can find on New Beginnings Family Services." Next, she called her old friend, Laura Thompson, now chief of pediatrics at City General. "Laura, I need a favor. A DNA test, rush basis, completely confidential." "Becca," Laura's voice was concerned. "What's going on?" "I can't explain yet. But I think—" Rebecca's voice caught. "I think my son might be alive." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca arranged for Sarah Martinez to bring Elijah to a private meeting room, away from the formal atmosphere of the courtroom. When he entered, his eyes found her immediately, that same look of recognition making her heart race. "Hello, Elijah." She kept her voice gentle. "Would you like to sit down?" He moved carefully to a chair, still clutching what she now realized was another photograph. "May I see what you're holding?" Slowly, Elijah extended his hand. This photo was older, more worn. It showed Rebecca leaving the hospital, her face drawn with grief. On the back was written, "Your real mom. Don't forget." "Where did you get this?" Rebecca asked softly. "Miss Jenny gave it to me." His voice was barely a whisper. "At my 3rd foster home. She said she used to work at the hospital where I was born. She said they lied to you." Rebecca's hand shook as she placed both photographs, side by side. "Elijah, I need to ask you something very important. Do you remember Miss Jenny's last name?" He shook his head. "She left after giving me the picture. The other foster parents said she got fired." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Martinez entered with a court-appointed child psychologist, Dr. Michael Watson. "Judge Williams, we need to discuss Elijah's temporary placement." Rebecca looked at the boy who might be her son, seeing the fear creep back into his eyes at the word placement. Making a decision that would probably raise eyebrows, she said, "He'll stay with me tonight." "Your Honor," Dr. Watson began, "given the circumstances." "I'm not speaking as a judge right now." Rebecca's voice held no room for argument. "I'm speaking as someone who needs answers. Ms. Martinez can stay with us to maintain proper protocol, as..." The afternoon turned to evening. Rebecca's home saw more activity than it had in years. Sarah helped Elijah settle into the guest room, while Rebecca spoke with Marcus Chen in her study. "The hospital's records from that period are surprisingly disorganized," Marcus reported. "Several files appear to have been altered or gone missing. But I did find something interesting. New Beginnings Family Services made regular payments to a nurse named Jennifer Kirkland." Rebecca's breath caught. "Can you find her?" "Already working on it. She left the state 5 years ago, around the same time New Beginnings shut down. But people leave trails." After Marcus left, Rebecca found herself standing in the doorway of the guest room watching Elijah sleep. His face was peaceful for the first time since she'd seen him, one hand still clutching the photograph under his pillow. Sarah spoke softly behind her. "I've never seen him relax like this. Usually his first night in a new place is difficult." Rebecca turned to the social worker. "I need you to be honest with me. Am I crazy for thinking this is possible?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "In my 15 years of social work, I've seen a lot of corruption in the system. Private adoption agencies working with hospitals, falsified documents, desperate prospective parents willing to pay anything. It's not as rare as people think." Later that night, after Sarah had settled into the other guest room, Rebecca sat alone in her study. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, pulling out the small box of baby mementos she had never been able to throw away. The tiny hat never worn, the hospital bracelet that had briefly circled her wrist, and the death certificate that now felt like a lie. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Found something. Hospital security footage from that night was supposedly erased, but I have a contact who might be able to recover it. Call you tomorrow." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, emotions warring inside her. Hope battled with fear, possibility with practicality. If Elijah really was her son, what then? How had this happened? Who was responsible? A small sound made her look up. Elijah stood in the doorway in borrowed pajamas, tears on his face. "I had a bad dream," he whispered. Without hesitation, Rebecca opened her arms. He came to her slowly, at first, then all at once, burying his face in her shoulder. As she held him, something deep inside her clicked into place, a recognition that went beyond logic or evidence. "It's okay," she murmured, stroking his hair. "You're safe now." They stayed like that for a long time, neither speaking. Rebecca found herself humming an old lullaby, one her mother had sung to her. To her surprise, Elijah hummed along. "How do you know this song?" she asked softly. "I remember it," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "From before. When you used to sing to me." Rebecca's heart stuttered. "Before? When I was in your tummy. The nice nurse, Miss Jenny, she told me you used to sing it all the time." He pulled back slightly, looking at her with those familiar eyes. "She said they took me away from you, but that someday I'd find you again." Tears slid down Rebecca's cheeks as she held him closer. Outside, the city had grown quiet, but inside her mind, pieces were falling into place. Tomorrow would bring investigations, DNA tests, and difficult questions. But tonight, in this moment, Rebecca knew with a certainty that defied explanation that she was holding her son. "Tell me about Miss Jenny," she said gently. "Tell me everything you remember." As Elijah began to speak, his voice growing stronger with each word, Rebecca reached for a notepad. Every detail could be important in unraveling what had happened 8 years ago. But more than that, she wanted to know everything about the years she had lost with her son. The night deepened around them as mother and son began the long process of finding their way back to each other. In her study, surrounded by law books and family photos, Rebecca Williams felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The Turners would fight to save their reputation. The hospital would deny everything. Old records would need to be unsealed, witnesses found, truth extracted from years of lies. But for now, Rebecca held her son, listening to his breathing even out as he fell asleep in her arms, and knew that everything in her life had led to this moment. The two photographs lay side by side on her desk, one showing what was lost, the other hinting at what might be found. Between them lay the truth of a story that was only beginning to unfold, a story of loss, corruption, and the unbreakable bond between mother and child. As the first light of dawn began to creep through her study windows, Rebecca made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She would hold accountable everyone who had played a part in stealing her son. And most importantly, she would make sure Elijah never felt unloved or unwanted ever again. The journey ahead would be difficult, but as she looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, Rebecca knew it would be worth every step. Because sometimes, in the midst of life's greatest injustices, miracles could still happen. And sometimes, those miracles came in the form of a small boy with familiar eyes, carrying a worn photograph and 8 years of lost memories. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as Elijah woke in Rebecca's guest room. For a moment, panic gripped him. Another new place, another strange bed. Then he heard humming from somewhere in the house, that familiar lullaby, and his racing heart steadied. He wasn't alone anymore. Rebecca stood in her kitchen, preparing breakfast with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. The DNA test results wouldn't come back for days, but in her heart she already knew the truth. The way Elijah hummed that lullaby, the precise way he scrunched his nose when concentrating, just like her father used to do. She had missed 8 years of these small discoveries. Sarah Martinez arrived early carrying a thick file. "I spent all night going through Elijah's records," she said, accepting a cup of coffee. "There's something you need to see." They spread the documents across Rebecca's dining room table, while Elijah ate breakfast in the kitchen. The earliest records were sparse, just a form stating he had been surrendered to New Beginnings Family Services by an unnamed mother. No birth certificate, no medical history. His first placement was with the Hendersons, Sarah explained, pulling out a weathered report. They kept him for 14 months before returning him to the agency. Said he cried too much, wouldn't sleep. Through the night, Rebecca's jaw tightened. He was an infant. That's normal behavior. The Hendersons were what we call serial fosters. They took in babies, collected the support payments, then returned them when it got difficult. Sarah's voice held barely contained anger. Elijah was 13 months old when they gave him back. The next placement was with a couple named Michael and Karen Davis. They kept him for 8 months before a neighbor reported suspicious bruises. The investigation was inconclusive, but Elijah was removed for his safety. Rebecca read through the police report, her hands clenching into fists. They claimed he fell down the stairs. He was barely walking. The system failed him, Sarah said softly. Over and over again. A small sound made them both turn. Elijah stood in the doorway, his empty breakfast plate clutched in his hands. His eyes were fixed on the scattered papers, recognition and fear warring on his face. "Those are my bad family papers," he whispered. Rebecca quickly gathered the documents, but Elijah shook his head. "I remember them. The mean ones who locked me in the dark." "Come here, sweetheart." Rebecca opened her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Elijah came to her. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." But something had broken open in Elijah. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. "The Davis house had a big basement. When I cried, they put me down there. Said the monsters would get me if I made noise." Rebecca held him tighter, meeting Sarah's horrified gaze over his head. This was the most Elijah had spoken in months, but the content broke their hearts. After them was Miss Jenny's house. Elijah continued. "She was nice. She read me stories and never yelled. But then she went away." Sarah consulted her files. Jennifer Kirkland was his foster parent for just under 6 months. She was terminated from the program abruptly, no reason given. "Because she told me about you," Elijah said to Rebecca. She showed me your picture and said they took me away from you. The next day, different people came and took me to a new house. Rebecca stroked his hair, fighting back tears. Can you tell us about the other houses? Elijah's body tensed, but he kept talking. The Wilsons had lots of kids. They made us fight for food. If you didn't eat fast enough, you didn't eat. The Wilsons' files showed they had fostered 17 children over 3 years before losing their license due to unsafe living conditions. But by then, the damage was done. Then came the Roberts. Elijah's voice got very small. Mr. Roberts liked to play games. Rebecca felt sick as she read between the lines of the Roberts file. Thomas Roberts was currently serving time for crimes against minors, but not before traumatizing countless foster children. The nice lady at the office said I had to be brave and tell the truth, Elijah whispered. So I did, but then everyone was mad at me. You did exactly the right thing, Rebecca assured him, her voice fierce with protection. You were very brave. Sarah pulled out more recent files. After the Roberts incident, Elijah spent 6 months in a group home before being placed with the Martins. They had a dog, Elijah offered, but they said I scared it by screaming in my sleep, so they sent me away too. The Turners were his 7th placement in 8 years. Each move, each rejection, had left its mark on his young soul. Rebecca thought about Patricia Turner's complaints, his silence, his withdrawal, his failure to bond. How dare they blame him for protecting himself the only way he knew how? A knock at the door made Elijah jump. Sarah went to answer it while Rebecca continued holding him. She returned with Marcus Chen, who carried a laptop and several folders. I found Jennifer Kirkland, Marcus announced without preamble. She's living under a different name in Oregon, and she's willing to talk. Rebecca's heart leaped, but she kept her voice calm for Elijah's sake. What did she say? She wants to meet, in person. Says she has documentation, papers, photographs, even some recordings she made while working at the hospital. Marcus glanced at Elijah. She says she's been waiting for this day for 8 years, Sarah spoke up. I can take Elijah to his therapy appointment while you— No. Elijah's grip on Rebecca tightened. Don't leave me. I won't, Rebecca promised. Never again. She looked at Marcus. Can she come here? She's already on her way. Should be here tomorrow morning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Watson, the court-appointed psychologist, came to evaluate Elijah in Rebecca's home environment. To everyone's surprise, Elijah spoke more than he had in months, though he refused to let Rebecca out of his sight. He's displaying clear attachment behaviors, Dr. Watson noted. The kind we rarely see in children with his history of trauma. There's something remarkable about his connection to you, Judge Williams. Late that afternoon, the preliminary DNA test results arrived. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, but before she could read it, Elijah spoke. I already know you're my mom, he said simply. I remember your heart. Rebecca looked at him questioningly. My heart? It's sound. When you used to sing to me, before I was born. I always remembered it, even when I didn't know what I was remembering. The test results confirmed what their hearts already knew. Elijah was her son. Rebecca sat down hard, the paper fluttering from her fingers. Sarah caught it, reading quickly. It's a match, she confirmed, tears in her eyes. 99.9% probability of maternity. That evening, after Sarah had gone home and Elijah was asleep upstairs, Rebecca sat in her study with Marcus, planning their next moves. Jennifer Kirkland's testimony will be crucial, Marcus said, but we need more. The hospital will fight this. They can't afford this kind of scandal. What about new beginnings? Rebecca asked. How deep does this go? Deep. Marcus opened his laptop. I've found financial records showing payments from the agency to hospital administrators, nurses, even a few doctors. This wasn't just about Elijah. They were running a systematic operation. Rebecca thought of all the other mothers who might have been told their babies died, all the other children fed into a corrupt system. Her judicial mind began cataloging charges. Fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy. We'll need protection, she said finally. Once this breaks, a lot of powerful people will try to bury it. Already arranged. I have friends in the FBI who are very interested in this case. A small sound from the doorway made them both turn. Elijah stood there in his pajamas, tears on his face. I had another bad dream. Rebecca opened her arms and he ran to her. Over his head she mouthed later to Marcus, who nodded and quietly packed up his files. After Marcus left, Rebecca sat with Elijah in the big armchair in her study. "Want to tell me about your dream?" "They were trying to take me away again." His voice was muffled against her shoulder. "The mean people." "That's never going to happen," Rebecca promised. "I'm your mom, and I'm also a judge. That means I have special powers to keep you safe." Elijah lifted his head considering this. "Like a superhero?" Rebecca smiled, her heart warming at this glimpse of the child beneath the trauma. "Something like that. And you know what else? You have powers too." "I do?" "Yes. You were brave enough to keep looking for me, even when everyone told you to forget. You kept that picture safe all these years. You never gave up hope." She hugged him closer. "Those are very special powers." They sat together in the quiet study, the moon casting shadows through the windows. Rebecca hummed their lullaby softly, feeling Elijah relax against her. "Tomorrow," she said gently, "someone is coming to visit us. Someone who knew you when you were very little. Miss Jenny." Elijah's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. She's going to help us make sure no one